Dr. Indra Chakravarti is known to us all because yesterday she was also speaking, and to the benefit of any new delegates today, let me briefly introduce her. Dr. Padma Shri Indra Chakravarti, presently the Chief Advisor of Public Health Engineering Department of Government of West Bengal, and she also held several other positions, very supreme positions, is former Additional DG Health Service and Director of All India Institute of Hygiene and Public Health and Chittaranjan Cancer Institute of Government of India, and she has double PhD and very extensively worked in the area of food and water safety, health and nutrition in the milieu of India and also globally. She is also a consultant to several national and international agencies, and she received, in recognition of her leadership in the field of food, agriculture and public health, she received several international and national awards, including FAO's the first Eduardo Sauma Award, which I learned very prestigious one. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
It's always such a pleasure to come to MSSRF. Dr. Swaminathan has been a philosopher, guide and mentor to me for so many years. So when I became the first chairman of the Hunger Project in West Bengal, you were the chairman of the Hunger Project in Tamil Nadu, and we had done so many projects together. One would never realize Dr. Swaminathan in his stature. He was with us like one of us. I think that's the beauty and the internal affection that he has. He's a great scientist, great human being, there's no doubt about that. I think above everything what I've always cherished is the great affection and love that he has inside. I think that percolates all over him, and I think it's very difficult for me to say anything because nothing is enough to say whatever I have to say for Professor Swaminathan. He's above anybody I've ever known, anybody I've ever loved, respected and thought of anything. I think he's above, he's much of a human being. I think that's what I can introduce. It's a pleasure and an honor, and with deep humility I'm chairing this session because sir is sitting here. I think this session which I'm chairing is a very important session, sir. You would know it's bridging the gap. I think that's something which you have been working, and this organization has been working among several sectors. And I think for the sake of humanity, bridging the gap is the most important thing. Whether you talk it of political situations, whether you think of a human being in his family life, whatever it is a gap bridging, which is the most important thing in life to stay happy, healthy and peaceful. So I think even for a success of a program of any kind, I think bridging this gap is the most essential thing. So I think this session to me is of, I think, of utmost importance, because this will actually bring down what we've talked for all these days. And we have excellent speakers in this session. As a matter of fact, if you look into the experts that we have here, the most renowned experts, one is representing nutrition, one is representing gender. I'm not telling by name, you all know Ramanarayan by nutrition. Nitya is representing huge gender issues. They'll be, I think, introduced later on. Agriculture and plant science, we have Vinod here. For marketing, we have Joanna here. So I think each weak issue of the whole sector is being, and lastly, social issues in agriculture are being highlighted by our last speaker, Avinash. So I think each one of the speakers here are highlighting each of the issues that need to be strengthened. The gap has to be filled. So I'm extremely happy to chair this session. And once again, I would like to thank the Foundation for giving me this opportunity. And with great humility that I'm chairing this session in front of my most respected and revered Professor Swaminathan gives me great pleasure and an honor with great humility. So I would ask the first speaker, Mr. Ramanarayan.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to give a very brief intro. Dr. Ramanarayanan, with a PhD in nutrition, has 3 decades of her experience in the sector of community and public health nutrition, with a special focus on women and early childhood. And she held her position in Ford Foundation Chair for Women and Food Security for about 5 years at MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. And she implemented the Community Hunger Fighters Program, a model, human resource development model at the grassroots level for addressing undernutrition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to you. And the topic that was given to me for today's presentation is building community awareness for nutrition-sensitive agriculture. I interpret it as how does one engage with the community? When one is working with the community on working on awareness aspects with regard to nutrition or with regard to linking nutrition with agriculture, how does one engage with the community? I'm very grateful. I would be using the experiences that I gained in the Community Hunger Fighters program to highlight some of the issues that I would be raising here. And I'm very deeply thankful to Professor Swaminathan for having given me the opportunity to have been part of that initiative where my learning was tremendous. And it is very difficult to summarize a very large human resource development program in 10 minutes. So what I thought after listening to the 2 days, that more appropriate and the concerns that were raised in working with the community to deal with the principles, the philosophies that underline this approach, how it was operationalized at the field level, and giving some highlights and examples. And basically the philosophy, the approach, that the first focus point of this whole exercise was what is the approach to be adopted while engaging with people. We all know the extension approach has been there for a very long time. You know, agricultural extension, any kind of a program had its own extension. So the extension approach, the focus is on behavioral change, yes, and adoption of practices. If a technology is developed, if a new superior technique is developed, then the technology is taken to the people, its merits are explained, and people are helped to accept and adopt a technology. But in a developmental approach, the focus is not on getting people to toe your line of thinking, but to bring in a process of self-transformation where people can make their own judgments about what is good and what is bad and then decide whether to adopt it or not. So, and in extension approach, the focus is mostly on theory, and the focus is on the individual. But in a developmental approach, the theory is linked with the existing social situation. In the context, in the given social, political, cultural context, how does this technology would you accept or adopt? Or what would you think of looking at this? And the focus is not on individuals. Though individuals participate in the program, the focus is on collective action and community. I'll explain why a little later. And extension approach, of course, encourages the individuals, because when we look at project outputs in terms of extension, how many people adopted this practice, how many people are using this technology, and so on. And when monitoring is done only to see whether that particular technology that you propagated has been taken up or not taken up, what were the difficulties, what were the problems, and so on. There's nothing wrong in all these things, but we feel as development professionals in the development sector, this has got certain limitations. But a development approach empowers an entire community. Monitoring is not done to see just whether technology has been taken up or not, how the entire project affected people and people's lives. And the more importantly, a development approach has to give hope that change is possible. Even in the worst of situations, you will have to say you have a right to dream, and you can realize your dreams, and you can fulfill, and you can overcome, and you can rise up from your situation. Now, in an extension approach, mostly they support the implementers to develop and conduct the program. The implementers visualize the entire program and develop, but in an extension approach. But in a development approach, both the implementers as well as the participants have an opportunity to decide and steer the course of the intervention. So broadly, these are the principles. And now what is then it means that people's participation has to be facilitated in any process. Now what do we understand by people's participation? So people's participation is not merely people participating in your program, benefiting from the program, enjoying the economic benefits or getting the benefits out of that project, but it is a creative social involvement and where they define and they fulfill their needs. And the taking of initiative and decision has to be in the hands of the people. They have to decide that this is how I want this intervention to be done, and these are my decisions, and this is how I would like to participate. So the people's power has to be linked with spontaneity and self-reliance. At the end of the day, people should feel empowered that they are the controllers of their own destiny. And this is a very complex and multi-dimensional process, and it varies from one location to the other. How people's participation can be engineered, how it can be brought about. This varies from one situation to another, and the way you analyze it and the way you understand and interpret the impact is largely a function of the analysis that you employ. and it is also evolutionary in nature. There are certain broad principles and guidelines with which you start, but as and when you start implementing and people join in and start shaping the program, it starts evolving, taking their inputs also. So now this is not something very new. What I have done is not something very original or anything. What I have done is to take some ideas from this person, Paulo Freire, who was in the 1940s. He was a Brazilian educator who brought about a tremendous revolution in the adult literacy classes. He took adult literacy for illiterate peasants in Brazil, and he not only taught them to become literate, but used adult education as a strategy to bring an uprising among the peasants. The text or the classes that he conducted, the course outline was about their oppression. The whole text or whatever material he supplied people to read and write would be about their oppression, would be about their life, would be about their own situation, and he helped them to reflect. At the end of the exercise, people who came out of the course not only were literate, but they were ready to form groups and take the government into action. So the most important point that he emphasized in this approach, in this kind of people's participation, if you need to engineer, what he said was it was collective critical reflection. It is not merely reflecting on your life, it is critical reflection, and it is not done in individual spaces. It is done individually and collectively as people together. When 4 or 5 people sit and reflect on their situation, each person's perception is taken. The collectivity and commonality is underlined, and can we reach some kind of a commonality in the existing situation amongst ourselves. This kind of collective critical analysis is what stimulates collective action. And then engaging in dialogue. The process of dialogue engages with both the implementers as well as the participants, so that the implementers also learn and the participants also learn. And education is understanding of the reality. It is not mere theory. It has to be linked with the social reality. And knowledge is not limited to technical information. It is the will, the desire, the aspiration of people which also has to be included as knowledge. Any driver of action that makes people to take action is to be considered as knowledge. And both the learners and the facilitators, they develop new knowledge as a result of these. These were his principles. And the principle involved in operationalizing it, relationship building with the community. It is not that I go as a person, as a technician or a scientist and merely give you some technology and come back. But we need to develop a close relationship with people, have empathy and have an understanding of their life. This is the first step, and relationship building is a continuous process which goes throughout. Any human relationship is bound to have conflicts, and those conflicts must be overcome in order to move ahead. The second is achieving acceptance. This is very important because at this point, both the implementers and the facilitators have to honestly understand what their real position is and to accept that, okay, these are my strengths and these are my limitations. When this level is reached, then comes the transition or the change for action. That is resolving the future. Now, how to assess people's participation? Now, this is more qualitative because results are quantitative. How many people got trained, how many people got benefited, what was the income level. But the process of transformation and sustainability itself as a concept cannot be quantified. Now, the basic objectives of this Community Hunger Fighter program was to sensitize the community to their own nutritional status, and to facilitate then the critical thinking and reflection, then help people to identify what is it that they want to do in terms of their dietary and agricultural practices, then demand and seek government utilize entitlements in order to facilitate their goals. And out of this exercise, if we can develop a framework for guideline and implementing it on a larger scale. So in the implementation, the first, it is important to bring visibility to the problem. The nutrition problem has to be visible to the community. So this was concretized through a nutritional assessment and survey, and this was then presented back to the community. After that, the relationship building started. Once it was, several trips have to be made to the villages where you have to sit with the community leaders, with all the people and other key leaders in it, in order to say that this is the situation, here we have something to offer. Now this was a very important and very critical because it's very abstract. You have nothing to offer, you don't have seeds, you don't have money, you don't have anything. What is it that you are going to sit and discuss in a room with us that will enable us to overcome our situation? This was the hardest part. You know, the abstract nature to concretize this was very difficult. Now this was operationalized in 18 villages in Koraput, and 2 staff members were involved, and they had to reside at the relationship building. Means you cannot sit in the office every day, go and visit the field. You have to be very close, stay with the community and you have to work with the community. So the initial trigger activity was considered as a residential capacity building program. If you see here, there were 3 modules, and the first module, if you see, are all activity based. The 3 modules had 3 different components. In the first one, the theory was linked with the social situation, like sanitation, hygiene, all were covered, linking nutrition and also with agriculture. The second one dealt with class, caste and gender dimension and entitlements. The third model was the goal setting module. If you see, all are activity based. Initially, people had to scrutinize what they were eating and then questioning the value system. How do you link the theory with the practice? Now here, the class discrimination. Why is it that so much value is attached to money? Yesterday it was very sad. Dr. Narayan and Hegde spoke, but that is the reality. What is the underlying value that you need to attack here? There is no sense of self-worth. You don't value yourself and you think money is important. Money is only, after all, a tool for your well-being. Your well-being is what is supreme. That is the value that you need to attack. And that was done through role plays and dramas, at the end of which, in this, I'm giving this as an example of a critical reflection by the participants. We never take into account of this. What they said was, rich man is always, idealized because he contributes money in any festival or anything. But we contribute so much of labor, cooking and food, and we never value that. So we are undervaluing ourselves. Then, as far as the implementers were concerned, the main reflection, the critical reflection out of this was, when we looked at all this, when we looked at the food habits of people, the erratic food habits, people, they were so much involved in their work, they never had a time frame, they never had a regularity or routine in their eating or food habits. So we were thinking that availability of food, access and all that were important. But what was important was the day-to-day lives of the people and how they were working towards actualizing themselves. Then we helped them to analyze their diets and come up with a kind of a program. I'm sorry, this is not very clearly visible. They worked out a schedule of what they would eat in the morning, during the various seasons, the timings, what time they will get up, what is the gap between one meal and another, and what are the little changes that they can bring about. And next is what they were divided into groups. Now, if this is how the meal pattern is going to be, this is what you are going to eat, bringing in dietary diversity, moving from this diet to that diet. Now, how will you plan this with agriculture? We divided them into groups and we gave one group the different types of land and what they will grow. And if you saw in the previous slide, they were working on the ground with Rangoli, and we gave them a model piece of land and asked them to grow. And they came up with one group which had upland, middle land and lowland, half an acre imaginary. They came up with all these kind of crops they will grow. They came up with 31 varieties of crops which could be classified into 6 major groups. Now, if you look at the initiatives after these people went back, you can see a variety of activities done by people. Now, one person started preparing 3 or 4 dietary varieties every day, straight away. Another looked at the kitchen garden. Then somebody had leased out the land, but they claimed the land back and started growing because they felt that they can grow nutritious food and have better access to food if they themselves started growing. Another person who was landless took a land on lease and started growing. So from the from this individual action, then the community action moved. They started discussing it among their colleagues and so on. They started monitoring the government programs, then started slowly revitalizing the existing grassroots level institutions. Now, the dynamics of participation, we started with 5 people in every village, about 90 people, but ended up with 154. It's not easy for the same person to keep participate again and again for all the various reasons that are listed here. There are personal problems, there are issues, there is a caste dimension here, where, when a particular training program, people would feel it is better for those community people participate, they are more skilled in that and we will learn from them. So, dynamics of participation, but this is what is needed because the entire community is energized. But the challenges were very great because this was a huge shift in terms of the institution's policy of engaging.
You can please, I think, overshot quite a bit.
Yeah, this is the last.
You overshot quite a bit. So
yes.
Sorry.
And so it is labor intensive, and because of its evolving nature with no set pattern, it's also very difficult for people to accept it and implement it. Thank you. I'm so sorry for repeating it.
Our next speaker is Professor Nitya Rao, who's a professor of gender and development at University of East Anglia in the UK. I think I'm quite impressed because she was the co-chair of the Young Girls Education Program, also of the United Nations. So I think she has a gender experience of not just reaching women when they're already into drudgery, but I think always young women also, which is very important to give them the strength, support, and knowledge when they're going to be women later on. So I think, Nitya, we're looking forward to hearing.
Yeah.
Dr. Nitya, she's a professor of, on gender and development, School of International Development, University of East Anglia, Norwich, UK, and she has about 30 years of experience as a teacher, researcher, field level practitioner, social activist focusing on gender equality and women empowerment. And Dr. Nitya has worked with UN agencies, bilateral agencies and NGOs, and was a member of UN Women's Expert Group on Economic Agency and Land Rights, and co-chair of the Global Advisory Committee of the UN Girls Education Initiative. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I'll just get straight into my presentation, which is on looking at gender and social inclusion, or gender and social identity, and the importance as mediators of agriculture, nutrition and health outcomes. I think yesterday Bhavani already spoke about LANSA and the farming system for nutrition, so I don't want to repeat some of the background on that. I'll go straight into the gender issue. I think one thing which I picked up from Dr. Maria Andrade yesterday is, and day before, when she talked about the orange flesh sweet potato, and that they directly decided, knowing that the orange flesh sweet potato in Africa is mainly a women's crop, they directly decided to target women and meet their interests, their needs, their priorities, what was the support that they needed, and so on. And I think that is something which is really lacking in India and in our context. I think a lot of people have spoken about millets, but millets is one of the crops where, especially in one of the Lansa sites, Koraput, which I will talk about a little bit more, is mainly a female crop. But we don't recognize that. So we are not directly addressing particular gendered needs, with the result that our outcomes are not what we would like to, what we should be expecting. So I think there is basically a kind of, farmers, communities, these are kind of homogenized categories. And we often as researchers don't recognize that communities of farmers are constituted of different kinds of people, men and women of different ages, in India of different castes, of different tribal groups, and that this social identity, it mediates their work patterns, what they can do, what they can't do, because we know also that caste imposes a lot of taboos in terms of what people are allowed to do, not allowed to do, decision making, access to services. In Koraput itself, we found that caste, for instance, mediating access to water, that the scheduled caste or the lower caste could only take water from the common wells after the others had taken. Of course, this adds to women's work burden by about 1 hour or 1.5 hours, and they don't have time for standing in the queues because they're all laboring women. So they go off to work and use poor quality water. So I think these are very important indicators which we don't often recognize. So when we started looking through LANSA from a gender lens at what was going on, I think there were several important factors that came into play, and one important issue was about seasonality. Not with the agricultural cycle, we know that agriculture is seasonal, but of course this implies that work burdens are also seasonal, and the time that both men and women have for different kinds of activities change across season. The food intake changes, and also the activity intensity, therefore the energy expenditure changes. So I think this is something which, and there were other factors. Very important, of course, is the agricultural context, the local agroecological context, the slopes, the rainfall patterns, the climate variability, which affect what you can grow, when you can grow, how much you can grow, what are the employment opportunities, and so on. Cultural practices and beliefs are very important, especially in terms of gender. Increasingly, we find, and I'll maybe if there's time speak a little bit more about it, that there are lots of kind of cultural restrictions, taboos in terms of what men and women not only can eat, but also in terms of issues like religious observances, fasting that takes place. Most of this fasting is imposed on women much more than on men, which of course for already undernourished women with high work burdens, this adds an extra level of stress. So I think just very simple, the two sites which were there, the graph on the left is an overall graph from Koraput, from the villages, Lansa villages that we studied, and on the right is from Wardha. We took time use surveys across 3 seasons with 60 households of different social groups. So it was just to get a sense of what was going on rather than to be statistically representative. But what was very interesting in terms of the headline finding is that women across seasons perform about, if you add all the activities that are done in a day, both domestic work and agricultural work, then about 56% of total activity is performed by women. Now, this is very interesting to note because in India, there was a time use survey done by the Government of India in 1999-2000. That was the first time use survey. And according to that time use survey in 2000, 53% of all activity was performed by women. So according to our survey now, 56% of all activity, which means that in some way, work burdens on women over the last 15-20 years seems to be increasing and not decreasing relative to men. The second important thing that I wanted to point out was that in the system of national accounts of the Government of India, what they call as SNA activities, in the 2000 survey, about 50% of SNA activities or the productive work was performed by women. And of course, all of the domestic and reproductive work was performed by women. That's why it was 53%. What we found in our time use survey is particularly seasonally, during planting and harvesting periods, that almost 80 to 85% of even productive work or SNA activities is being performed by women. And at the same time, added on to that is the whole burden or 95% of domestic and care work. So I think this is really a very significant finding which we don't take into account, because when we are introducing new technologies, new practices, expecting women to work more, we don't already realize how much they are doing. And I think across these slides we see that the leisure time, or what we call as the system of national accounts, NSNA, is 2 hours less for women consistently than men. So this is just then to go one step further. Having looked at men and women, I think the point, my brief was really to talk about social inclusion and social identity as well. So we also disaggregated this time use, not only by season but also by subcaste or ethnicity. And again, it's very interesting that there are the two groups of the Parojas and the Malis. I don't know if you can see it there, where while the productive work is 2 hours more for men in average, if you look at the whole year, 9.37 hours versus women 7.19 hours. But if we look for Parojas and Malis, actually the male and female SNA is almost the same at 9 hours. So these are the poorest groups. Parojas are the landless tribal groups in Koraput, and the Malis are vegetable cultivators. Vegetable again is a female crop, more or less. So women are as much involved in vegetable production as men, but this is not being explicitly recognized. If we look at time spent on ESNA, I think this ESNA is the extended system of national accounts, which covers all reproductive and care activities. Now this is very important for nutrition outcomes, because unless, especially for the young child, I think yesterday there was a lot of discussion about the first 1,000 days 0 to 2 period. But if during that time the mother doesn't have adequate time to feed the child at regular intervals, then it is going to affect the nutritional outcomes. So I think time is a very, food is an important factor, but equally important factor is the time to feed the young child. And again, this graph is very interesting, because if we look at the time used for ESNA, again during planting and harvesting season, for the Parojas and the Malis, it's really reduced to about 3 hours compared to 5 hours on average. And this includes all the tasks. So I'm not presenting, I have done a detailed breakdown of ESNA tasks. Out of this 3 hours, 2 hours goes on cooking across the period, because they are cooking on wood. They don't have stoves, gas, and so on. They have to collect the firewood and so on. But if 2 hours goes on this, that during planting and harvesting season, there's only 1 hour left for these women for all the other tasks, which includes washing, cleaning, feeding, childcare, and so on. So it's very squeezed. Children are often left on their own and not fed properly. So the calculation was that almost 30% decline we see in time available for care tasks. The final thing that we did is in terms of energy intakes and expenditures, and this was calculated, the energy intake. Again, it's just to get an idea. It's not statistically significant. Don't hold me to the exact numbers, because this was just calculated on 1 day in a season, based the intake on the basis of the diet survey or what they had consumed, and the expenditure on the basis of their activities, time use during that particular day. We use the WHO and the FAO tables in order to calculate the equivalent. And it's interesting that the gaps in terms of energy intake and expenditure is actually highest in the harvesting period and much higher for men than for women. So I think there is clearly a gender issue here which needs to be explored a little bit more about the effort intensity of certain kinds of tasks. Maybe men are doing the more effort intensive tasks. There have been early studies, I think Dr. Bamji and others were involved with sort of measuring the time intensity of different activities in urban Hyderabad. But that study is already 10 years old, and these kinds of studies haven't really been repeated. And finally, to look at the effect on women's own health of this seasonal energy stresses in terms of intake and expenditures, we find that there is a loss in BMI, in body weight, which occurs seasonally, but it is more intensive for particular groups. And not surprisingly, here the Parojas are actually the worst affected, with almost a 4% loss in body weight during the harvest period. And I think yesterday somebody made a comment when I raised the question of seasonality, that there's possibly a time lag in terms of a seasonal time lag in which the weight loss actually shows up. So I think there are many reasons for this. And this is again a contrast from Africa. The studies on this, mainly for Africa by Feroluzzi and others in the 80s and the 90s, show that there's not much of gender difference, or if at all, it's more for men than for women. And here we are finding that actually the seasonal weight loss, body weight loss for women at 3 to 4% is more than for men at 2 to 3% of body weight. It's due to reduced consumption during particular seasons, but also being in agriculture. I think one of the strategies in Africa was that during these periods of intense food shortage, that people try to reduce their activity level to save as much energy as possible. But in an agricultural society, when there are peak periods where activities have to be undertaken, this is not possible. So finally, I just want to conclude with a plea that we need to address, when we're talking about the agriculture nutrition links, the time trade-offs in terms of the trade-off between spending time on agriculture and attending to care of both the family and the young child. And this can be done in several ways, by reducing drudgery, by investing in drudgery reduction technologies and so on. Quality child care, provision of quality child care which can at least ensure regular feeding of the young child when the mother is away at work in the peak agricultural seasons. And I think provision of basic infrastructure, many people including the chair has spoken about water and sanitation, but also clean energy, cooking gas and so on would be very helpful in order to reduce some of the care deficit. And the larger issues I think for policy is that, which I started with, that certain crops are female dominated. We need to recognize that these are female crops, that women are farmers, and then address all their needs if we want to make strides in this. And finally, that women and also men are not homogeneous groups, are not homogeneous people. So we need to distinguish by their social identity, identify who is the most marginal in a particular location, and then try and provide them additional support if at all possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nitya. It's finished right on time. We didn't have to remind you also. But, you know, Nitya's study, I'm going to talk a little bit at the end of the thing. Nitya's study brings back to me a memory of a study that we did in Sudan first and then in Nepal of time energy saving when you bring drinking water closer to the households. And you actually save nearly 50% of the energy that you get from your food when you can bring water closer. It was a UNICEF-supported study. I'll just share a little bit. I think it brings back, it was exactly this, how a saving of time and saving of drudgery, energy saving, we did it by using an oxylog, by how much of oxygen expenditure was there. It was remarkable that how much of food energy is spent on these issues, spent on work. I think it's a wonderful experience, wonderful study, and glad to know that this was done in this Lancer project. Next speaker would be Mr. Gopi Ramaswamy. He's the country director for Center for Agriculture and Bioscience International, CABI, New Delhi. They have been actually done a lot of work in preventing crop losses by linking to a lot of farmers. I think if Nina can introduce him, please. Yeah.
Gopi couldn't make it, and Dr. Vinod Pandit represent Dr. Gopi today.
and he is the country coordinator of CABI, specifically working on plant-wise program, and he has rich experience in the field of research and development, teaching, extension, and agricultural trade.
Good afternoon, respected Professor M.S. Swaminathan, my fellow panelists. Being with them is a great honor for me, and fellow delegates from different organizations. At the outset, I will convey my thanks on behalf of the Regional Director for CABI South Asia for giving us an opportunity to share our experiences, our programs, our activities globally, and more particularly in the Asian region and in the South Asian region through our different programs. Aligning our activities with the today's discussion points, we are working towards breaking the barriers on food and nutritional security, bridging the gaps. Before starting on what we have been doing in terms of bridging the gaps through our different programs, I would just like to introduce about CABI. It's an intergovernmental organization having its 48 member countries across the Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It's about 110 years old organization with our offices at 21 locations, working on the agriculture and environment sector. Through different projects, we work in almost 70 countries worldwide, and our work is a little different in a way because I'll say that we are not probably using our brains. It's actually the partners or the member country representatives who are guiding us through our different regional review conferences from time to time. And based on the suggestions which the governments, these member countries give us to work on, prioritize our areas, we also come up with the suggestions coming directly from the field while working with the different local partners or even the farmers, what is actually the strategy needed to be formulated by the governments in these respective countries. And then, being a UN level treaty organization, we try to align our activities and contribute in a way what UN is envisaging to do in terms of sustainable development goals. And we have aligned almost 6 of the major SDGs wherein we think that we are contributing in a way to meet the requirements of the smallholder farmers and contributing in a way to reduce their crop losses and provide them the advisory on different aspects what they need is locally relevant and practical. The broad areas of our working is majorly under the theme, we call it as knowledge for development, wherein we speak about more in the plant health management. We have been talking about the nutrition. Definitely it is important. It is the main focus of the today's discussions also. But I must say that about 40% of the crop losses happen at the field or at the post-harvest level. So it becomes very important, and it's an important aspect in terms of enriching again the nutrition at the field level of the smallholder farmers. Because of these crop pests and disease, there is a heavy losses being faced by the smallholder farmers. We have one more broad area of work. We call it as a knowledge management, wherein almost 9 million abstracts are compiled and being shared with the different organizations, whether research or national plant protection organizations, who can use this information for making their policies and in making their work in compliance to the WTO system. Under the ICT work, we have started some programs which actually are working in alignment with the theme of bridging the gaps, how we put up the information directly into the hands of the end users or the farmers. So we have different programs in the agricultural development which are completely driven by our ICT expertise, and one of the program I'm proud to say we are having with MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and it's now I think going in almost 6 states in India. On the market access, value chain and trade, since all the programs are mostly aligned within the 6 SDGs and within the country priorities of different member countries, the plant health management, knowledge management, or ICT are an important aspect of a market access value chain in the trade, wherein the information related to the sanitary and phytosanitary aspects is being much exploited by our member countries to have an access to the markets in different countries or even the locally. Invasive species management is now a big threat coming to different countries. Like recently we have the fall armyworm in maize in Africa, which we have been quite actively working in managing the problems which are alien to a particular geographic location. Then bioservices, which is actually the heart of CABI. Since 1910, it was actually the program under the Commonwealth Mycological Institute and Commonwealth Entomological Institute when these bioservices or diagnostic aspects of the were taken by CABI and providing services on diagnosing the different pests and disease, particularly the fungus and insect pests attacking the crops. Now, CABI, since we have a domain of working across the different sets, so we play a key role in bridging the gaps by linking the science and development so that a theoretical research can be actually put into an actionable knowledge and actionable use by the end users. In terms of agriculture and in terms of nutrition, in both sectors we are having a complete content database which is being shared through different programs and is being used by the other agencies. The communication expertise, how to give information or make it available to the end users in the relevant way what they feel, maybe in the particular language which is compatible with the end users. The delivery framework, as I was mentioning about one of the flagship programs of which CABI is running plant-wise with MS Swaminathan, wherein we have a human interface through which we try to provide the information to the smallholder farmers in different locations at the remote places. And then the partnerships, because the world is moving towards the partnerships. So CABI is happy or proud to say that we have almost 200 partnerships within the different projects across the globe. And under the nutrition content, we are having the nutrition and food science database, which is carrying about almost 2.6 million records on the content and related to the food and how to use that information, how to be tailored in different languages in the respective countries. Global Health Database is one of the specialist database which is dedicated to the public health, which captures data about the key information required by the woman and child particularly. And the knowledge bank, we have this bank which carries the knowledge about different aspects of a crop production, particularly on the pest and disease management and the nutrition related information. As I was saying that we are proud to say we have almost 200 partners across the different countries, and with this strength, CABI was chosen or selected as one of a strong organization to take the global open data for agriculture and nutrition and host its secretariat at its within its premises, in the office. And within the Godan, it's mentioned 280, but it has almost reached now 500 partners who are using the Godan platform to share the accessible and available usable data for different agricultural and nutritional usage. Under the ICT framework, we have a long-standing experience which ranges from multi-country programs to small individual projects, so working with different dimensions from the grassroots level up to the national level or international level. We have we ran programs like Direct to Farm, wherein mobile messaging was one of the components. M-Kisan, Kafi Mobile, focusing on specific crops. E-Zaraat in Pakistan, in the Punjab region, we are running this program, and it completely focuses on the pest and disease management and providing the information through the ICT technology. And M-Plant-Wise, wherein mobile plant-wise aspects have been taken within the plant-wise program, so that the tablet-based advisory system can be provided to the plant doctors, which are being trained under the different CABI modules, to give relevant information to the farmers at the field level. Recently, CABI has also started a program which is actually funded by UK Space Agency. So this program again focuses majorly on the pest risk information system and invasives program, wherein the CABI has been given the mandate of calculating the information or assessing the risk of different pests coming to the field crops, and making an assessment on the basis of GIS platform, provide information so that pest alerts and pest advisory can be provided in advance to reduce the crop losses. Under the M Nutrition initiative, which has been run by CABI across Asia and Africa, and about 14 developing countries has been covered, with reach to 3 million people across these countries. And in all these 14 countries, the country-specific content was actually made, and nutrition issues and crop and livestock advisory was provided through the mobile messaging. Capacity building programs within the agriculture and nutrition sector. We have this global flagship program called as Plant-Wise, wherein we have almost reached to 4.5 million farmers globally. And we have an individual project, like I was mentioning about this initiative, is a kitchen garden skill project, wherein women were actually focused, and the objective was to build the capacity of these women farmers, particularly in the vegetable production, and it was observed that about almost 97% of the increase was found in consumption of the vegetables in the households. With this, I thank you all.
Our next speaker is Dr. Joanna Kane-Potaka. She's the director, did I pronounce it correctly? Okay. Director, External Relations and Strategic Marketing, International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT. I think she is a marketing person, and I think so. We are all waiting to, from yesterday we have been talking about how do you bring in marketing in the whole process of agriculture. So you're the one. I think you'll also talk about smart food initiatives a bit. Okay. Joanna, please.
And he also developed our mission for ICRISAT 45 years ago, which with his vision still stands as very relevant today. And he continues to be an advisor for ICRISAT, so we're very privileged and grateful to have that professor as the basis behind what ICRISAT is today. And greetings to all my other industry colleagues. I really just want to make one point today, but I still need my whole 10 minutes. So I found it, and I wonder if you found it really, really odd yesterday that we spent a whole day talking about food, and we didn't talk about consumer preferences, consumer demand. We didn't talk about what people like to eat. We didn't talk about taste and desire. We had one intervention from Roy during the day saying, has anyone thought about taste? Even when the word marketing was used, it was used in relation to selling the product, so the pushing of the product out. Now, luckily today, my faith in R&D was restored slightly thanks to a couple of presentations. So Vilas from IIMR. IIMR is very much seeing that we've got to look at the whole value chain, and that means driving it from the consumer end as well and understanding the consumer. And Ashish talked also about that whole consumer side and growing that demand. And we had one interjection, thankfully, from Jaya Sharee saying, you know, look at what Maggie's done. What are we doing with millets there? And actually, when you think about Nestle, who brought out the Maggie noodles, they would never, ever talk about their food products without thinking about and being driven by the consumer and what the consumer wants, what they find tasty, what's convenient, etc. And Nestle has a very large nutrition program too, but they would not do a nutrition program without it being driven by the consumer. Now, I'm not doing an advertisement for Nestle. They were just a good example to use. So really, whatever is, we can come driven to what we work on from different angles. It can be because we're looking at adaptation to climate change. It can be because we're looking at overcoming malnutrition. There can be a variety of reasons, but what we need to do is include in the solutions driving from the consumer side and what they need. I mean, even the poor people still like to eat certain things. They have their personal preferences, making them, whether they're living in a rural area, whether they're a certain caste, no matter what their income is, they're human beings and they're exactly the same as us, and we choose our foods by what we like. So how do we integrate that into our solutions? So I'll give just one example today of the Smart Food Initiative that we're working on, and we're working closely with a number of partners. So excuse me putting my own children in my own front slide there. And I'll just talk from a bigger picture first. So decades ago during the Green Revolution, the big focus was on food security. So it was about having just enough food to eat. And then, as you know, the hidden hunger we became more aware of that, and focus came then on nutrition security. And more recently, the UN and others are talking about sustainable diets, so diets that are sustainable on the environment. So what we think is that we should take all this together and go further and have a focus on smart food. So we define smart food as 3 criteria. So it's good for you, so it's got the nutrition aspect, good for the planet, so it's, I don't know what happened there, good for the planet, and then also good for the farmer. But our biggest challenge in achieving moving ahead with smart food is that we have what I call the food system divide. So for decades and decades, we've had the vast majority of investment in what I call the big 3, the wheat, maize and rice. So whether you're talking about the policy support, the private industry investment, the R&D, the product development, or even the development aid, the vast majority have gone into the big 3. For example, wheat, maize and rice deliver about 50% of all the calories and protein consumed globally. And actually there was an interesting statistic in Nature just recently where they said 45% of all private industry agriculture investment in R&D went towards one crop, and that was maize. I mean, that's a huge, huge amount of money for all private industry investment globally going into one crop. Now, we know this is a problem having the food system divide because we know we do need more diversity in our diets and on farm. And I won't explain that more because we heard a lot about that yesterday and today. So what our aim is under the Smart Food Initiative is, instead of the big 3, can we move that to the big 5, maybe eventually the big 7? So it's not one crop versus the other, it's about bringing in the diversity. And this is what someone hasn't achieved yet. A lot of people work on other foods, but we haven't achieved mainstreaming them back in as a staple in developing countries. So that's our objective, which is very challenging. It's not just popularising some smart foods, but can we bring them back as a staple? And we think if we can achieve that, then we can have a larger impact on malnutrition and some of the environmental issues and farmer resilience and income. But it's not just bringing anything back as into mainstream. We want to select some smart foods, a food that fills that criteria of good for you, good for the planet, good for the farmer. So then we said, okay, what will we work on first? So we chose millets and sorghum first. Now the reasons for that is, first of all, they do fit that criteria of smart food. And a lot of people have talked about the sorghum and millet, so I won't detail that now. They are a traditional crop across India and other parts of Asia and a lot of sub-Saharan Africa. And they're highly resilient, so important with climate change. We think the time is right now because In India, but also in parts of Africa, there are these urban food trends towards some of the traditional highly nutritious crops. They're very niche markets, but they are growing. And we're finding that the urban markets are the aspirational markets that do influence the rural areas as well. We think we haven't lost too many generations yet. There is still a real nostalgia around the sorghum and millets, not with the younger generation, but the rest of us. And also they fit a lot of the Western food trends. Now, the reason I talk about the West is, as under the Smart Food Program, we think it's important to also target the Western countries, because if we want to generate more R&D into this area, and a lot of that will come from the West as well, to generate that, they have to know what sorghum and millets are. They have to have some connection to it. When it means nothing to anybody, it's not going to make a difference. So it should be interesting to see the statistics on quinoa. Since that became popular in the West, has that driven more R&D into that product? And some of these Western food trends that sorghum and millet fill is they're a superfood because they're super nutritious. They're an ancient grain, which is a big trend. They're gluten-free, which is a huge trend, and they're low GI, so good for diabetes. And a very new food trend just coming out now is about ancient seeds, and they fill that as well. But the problems are the image. So the image, and we've heard it also today and yesterday, the image of sorghum and millet being seen as old-fashioned or often food for the poor people. And then in the West, there isn't an image because it's just not even known, hardly. And of course, because it's had so little investment, then the value chain is well underdeveloped, which means it's not always best for the farmer until we develop that value chain. So just a few ideas on market potential. So millets have multiple uses, and food only being one of them, but there's multiple ways to use it. But I want to draw attention to the food in the bottom right-hand corner there, which is Wheat Bix. So this is from Australia, a product that came out recently, and it's 96% sorghum. But they don't say sorghum on the cover. And I talked to the company, it's because there is no market value for them to even mention sorghum because no one knows what it is. Now, they wanted to use it because it's gluten-free. But it's an example of challenges we have and why the marketing component is important. So I have 1 minute left, so I'm going to go fast. There's great market potential to drive millet and sorghum, and just a few statistics. So in India, the food processing sector is increasing about 20% per year. There are very few food sectors that are increasing at such a huge amount, and it's worth $250 billion a year. We can tap into that, and I'm sure IIMR are leading the way there too. Globally, the superfood market is still growing at about 6% per year. And quinoa exports are meant to, by 2020, which is very soon actually, are meant to be worth about $300 million a year. Now, sorghum and millet can be a market that size. There are many social benefits from the nutrition, which has been talked about, and for farmers, so I'm going to go quicker. Our approach, though, is we said, okay, if we want to drive millets and sorghum and mainstream them, we have to do something different. Everything that's being done is helping build the industry, but how are we really going to break that divide? We have to do something different. So we want to take more of a consumer-driven demand approach, and with that, build the value chain. Now, and really see ourselves as a catalyst. I mean, we're working very much with partners in India. We're partnering directly with IIMR to lead this and to work together. We're working with NIN and many others. The methodology I'll have to do quickly. The concept and messaging, so we're trying to build a scientific backed document behind any claims of sorghum and millet to how they're good for you, the planet and the farmer. Second component is really creating a whole demand pool, and that's got two parts. It's marketing campaign, but also working with food processors. No use marketing something if you don't have good, modern, convenience products that keep the nutritional value. And then the third component in the methodology is, if we can drive demand and build that, how do we ensure the rural communities benefit, both nutritionally and livelihoods perspective? And we have a whole range of activities around that. So we're really keen to continue to partner with people if you want to be part of the Smart Food Global movement and our little fun characters we have. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, for finishing on time. And I think under your leadership, I think the traditional foods, millets and sorghum will get a new life once again. Yeah. The next speaker is Dr. Avinash Upadhyay. He's a Deputy Director Program, Digital Green Foundation from Delhi. I think he's bringing modern information technology into strengthening agricultural extension. That's right. I think modernization of agricultural extension. Please.
Mr. Avinash Upadhyay is the Deputy Director Programs with Digital Green. He looks after program in the state of Odisha and West Africa. And he has been experimenting with the use of technology in promoting nutrition and agricultural programs. He has over 15 years of experience, and he managed programs in sustainable rural livelihoods, maternal, infant and young child nutrition across India and countries in West and East Africa.
Thank you so much, Indira ma'am, and thank you so much, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, for giving us this opportunity to present. In fact, I realized that I am the only Mr. in these 2 days among all the doctors, and accidentally Dr. Indira also mentioned me, Dr. Avinash. So I am privileged. So, so it's a real opportunity and to present in front of Dr. Swaminathan himself. So my presentation, brief presentation, has 3 important parts. The first part, I will be talking about digital green organization, because this is a whole journey from agriculture to nutrition and nutrition sensitive agriculture. I will keep it brief, but I need to, otherwise things will not be connected. So I will be talking about digital green organization, digital green's history little bit, and the digital green model and different components. The second part of my presentation will cover how we ventured into the area of nutrition after a positive start in agriculture extension. And the third part of my presentation will cover how we are now getting into the area of nutrition sensitive agriculture. So Digital Green started in the year 2006 as a research project in Microsoft Research Labs in Bangalore, and we are experimenting to come up with like another innovative, efficient extension model after training and visit extension system, which was popularized by World Bank in 60s and 70s. So we did research almost for 3 years to come up with this model, and finally in 2009 the research project was over. In the meantime, we registered Digital Green as a non-profit both in US and India. In 2009, when we got the results of Digital Green, we found that it is almost giving us 7 times more adoption than the classical training and visit extension system, and almost 10 times more cost effective than the classical extension system, though it was a controlled evaluation in 40 villages in and around Bangalore. Then we scaled up with different national level NGOs, and finally we are Digital Green organization. What is the background of the formation of Digital Green organization is very important to know. In 2005, Government of India sponsored a national sample survey to understand what are the sources of information typically a farmer relies on for new information and technology. And the study found that the formal channels of communication, like the extension workers or various other approaches, broadcast methods like the television programs like Krisi Darshan or radio programs, are actually contributing less in knowledge transfer. Instead, maximum learning happening through informal channels of communication through word of mouth among the community members during their leisure time. From this study, you can find that maximum learning actually happens through other progressive farmers than the government demonstration. Government demonstration actually is the least impact. So then actually at that time we were thinking about something, a model based on visual media. And this study actually helped us thinking about if we can develop something based on the peer learning principles or adult learning principles. And finally, we came up with this digital green model. It has many components, so I will be discussing about two important components. One of the important components is participatory content production. In digital green, we say our unique selling proposition is that this model is by the community members, of the community members, and for the community members. In digital green, we partner with existing development efforts who are already working with rural communities. We train 4 to 6 members from the community in developing short videos which are essentially on best practices on various testimonials. These videos are all in local dialect and usually 8 to 12 minutes in length, focusing local actors, local community members. And when they develop these videos, they go through a training program, and a 5-day training program where they learn about various aspects of video production. And these are very simple module, participatory module for community people, covering all aspects of video production, starting from location scouting, actor selection, to storyboarding, to editing. And in all this process, we used inexpensive cameras and other editing softwares, which are usually free, which comes in like your Microsoft systems. And the whole idea of developing these videos, as I mentioned, is based on some principles like behavior change principles and adult learning principle. What exactly we are going to achieve in all these videos? Basically, 3 important things we are going to achieve in these videos, these community videos. One of the things is that we want to reduce the perception of teachers teaching people, because that's against adult learning principle. When we first developed the videos, we used to develop videos involving scientists. Then that did not work, so it was like a phase-wise approach. So that's why we wanted to reduce that thing. The second thing is like we wanted to promote local stars. We got this, that time this American Idol program was very famous. So we got the idea of if we can develop something in that line, because at least in a country like India, people are very fascinated about this medium, television medium and all. People always wanted to showcase their work. And finally, demystify technology, because a lot of time what happens, the educated people, we do a lot of things, we use a lot of vocabulary which is not understood by community members. And especially even there are villages, remote villages, where people don't understand even metric system. Even by mistake, if you say that this is 6 feet, in some villages in very rural parts of eastern or central India, people might not understand what is a feet. So those type of aspects we considered in all these community videos. Once these community videos are produced, these are disseminated by local mediators. These local mediators are from the community. They are based in those villages, and they disseminate these videos using a pocket-sized battery-operated Pico projector. It's a very small projector. That also came up after a lot of research. Initially, we used to have this television sets, but that did not work. So now you can see in this photograph, she is disseminating. These videos are disseminated primarily in self-help groups or farmer groups in a village, and they try to cover all the households in that village. Even if they don't have self-help groups, then they try to create new self-help groups or farmer groups, and they cover the whole village, so no person is left out. And during evening times, they disseminate these videos to a group of 20 to 25 people. The whole beauty of this dissemination program is human engagement. So these mediators go through a 2-day training program where they learn about group facilitation techniques and cooperation. So when they disseminate, they pause in between during the video dissemination, they field questions, they capture feedback, and the most important thing is that they encourage participation, because usually in a group some people will be vocal, they will always participate, but there is no proof that they are going to actually be the early adopters. Maybe they are the laggards. So that's a very complex mechanism. So we wanted to encourage that. The other thing is that these are on-demand screenings. So even if you are not there in a broadcast session, you are going to lose that session. But here they discuss, they fix up a time, and they come together, then they watch the dissemination session. Every day they take the telemetrics, and accordingly those documents are recorded. Okay, so the challenge for us was we are very successful in this approach on agriculture context. But the question for us was, because we were working in all these difficult, challenging conditions in eastern and central Indian states with the self-help groups, and most of these farmers used to have like single cropping because these are rain-fed areas. And in lean seasons, they started asking, why are you not disseminating videos? So the biggest challenge for us was to what exactly we show them during the lean season, because digital green videos are shown during the actual time of practice. If land preparation is going on, then the digital green video is shown. So with this, we thought maybe nutrition videos are one of the ways to show them. But the problem with nutrition videos are, these are not measurable. The impact is not measurable, and these are not tangible, unlike agriculture. If you're doing some practice, then you can go and see in the field. With this, we did a feasibility study to examine whether we can integrate. This was the first step of integrating maternal, infant, young child nutrition, which is a very specific behavior. So we tried if we can integrate. So we tried that, and we are also assessing this government health and nutrition if we can, because government health and nutrition extension system is a very now proven extension system in India, where in every village you have asas, Anganwadi workers, so they need to be part of this whole journey. So that was also another challenge. We did this feasibility study, and the key elements was like, we did like a formative research in the beginning, mainly focus group discussions and in-depth interviews. And we found some interesting facts, like we are discussing last 3 days, very interesting facts, like gender role dimensions. In families, in rural areas, even if you have food availability, the typical practice is that the first elder people will eat the food, then the male members, then the children, and then the PLW, pregnant and lactating women. So these are the practices prevalent. Now, food-related barriers are there. There is a belief system in many villages in India that if you eat more, then your baby will grow big, and you have a complicated delivery. And if you have a complicated delivery, then you might have to go to a private hospital. And if you go to a private hospital, you have to incur expenses. So belief systems are pretty complicated. I mean, these are not like recent things, 3-4-year-old things, but these are like complicated when this is like 2012, 2013 when we did this study. So then we based on this, we developed a 2-day nutrition training program, and we developed videos on various interesting new things like reducing workload of women, and then various videos on taboos. So basically this study was concentrating on various understanding barriers and facilitating factors to improve the nutrition. Then the result was pretty positive. We noticed an increased demand to show the videos in more groups. And there is a high degree of knowledge retention. I will not use the word adoption here in nutrition context, but it's more of knowledge retention and then promotion. I know something, I'm not practicing, but at least I'm promoting. I'm telling other people, because that's very important in nutrition context. And then ASAs and Anganwadis also reported this IFA tablet, because we had a video on IFA tablet, the benefits of IFA tablet. And most important thing is that these ASAs and Anganwadi workers feel that this is more of a job aid rather than additional work for them where they spend time, because they have to watch the disseminations. We continued. That was like, we integrated pretty successfully the nutrition specific behaviors, but the problem was how to make it nutrition sensitive, because it was a complex area and we had very limited evidence other than some vitamin A results, and lately we have some like anemia and wasting results. And then the other problem with research was that we had very limited about like scaling up the initiative. The results were mostly in particular conditions. You are not very sure whether those will fit to your conditions, because those are pilot projects in a very small scale. And in many of the research evidence that has come out in the last 4 to 5 years, you have very little cost effectiveness studies. So even if you have something, some result, you don't know whether you can integrate in your system. So we continued trying to understand this nutrition sensitive agriculture thing with the help of other organizations, international organizations like Spring and all. And we continued. This is one of the exercises where we are trying to actually understand in a day, in the different times like morning, afternoon, evening, and then what are the activities typically men, women, and the mother-in-laws do in a family. these are the exercise where we are trying to understand. Yes, I am almost done. Two more slides. So these are like exercises we are trying to understand how, and one of the beauties of these exercises is that slowly men realize that though they are doing a lot of hard work, but women continuously doing the work for almost like 24 hours, there is absolutely no rest for them. So when you add up all these efforts, it's actually much more than what, and we have already seen the statistics. Then we also did like a food ranking in all these communities that we are working, because since yesterday we are discussing about how you decide about test and all those things. So this was very important for us, like what do you think healthy for you? What do you think healthy for you? What do you think like your family members like? Whether it's affordable to you, whether it's convenient to prepare, whether it's locally available. These questions we started asking in different community setups so that we understand, because these are very complex phenomena. Even if you have availability, there is no guarantee that you are going to use because you don't like the test. Finally, we came up with like, last year we came up like a pathways for how we link in digital green contest, how we link agriculture and nutrition. And these are the 4 areas we identified that at least for the time being, next 3 to 4 years, we are going to concentrate on this. What we need to do, we need to increase the production of diverse nutrient-rich food. That's one thing we are going to do. Then the assumption is that the income, there will be some disposable thing, and then their income will increase, and they will use that income, the extra income they will be using for nutrition. And there is this women empowerment, because I mentioned the biggest problem is distribution, household distribution is not happening. Women doesn't have any role in taking decisions on nutrition aspects. So whatever you produce, whatever the situation, it's not much of use unless you change this dynamics. And then wash. Yesterday we spoke about environmental anthropathy, diarrhea, and all those things. So definitely these have also impacts on stunting, wasting. These have all direct impacts on wasting and stunting. Then finally, I'm giving 2 examples of the videos that we developed and how we say that these are like nutrition sensitive. Ma'am, this is the last slide. So like I have given examples of 2 videos, growing Indian spinach for nutrition. These are like 2 videos recently we have developed, and how we are making these nutrition sensitive ones. In the first video, we are emphasizing to increase household level consumption. People consume, but not much. Then pregnant and lactating mothers can contribute to farming during pregnancy time, because this is not much of hard work. And we are promoting also hand washing behavior. Then we are promoting wider spacing. This is an agriculture context, so that production will be more. And then use of compost, which is another sustainable practice. So second video also I have given. Similarly, we are creating POPs for all these videos, and we are developing them. And I will finish, I will not go further. Thank you so much. We are doing like a research on this. So I'm not going to describe this because I have already taken my time. So we are actually currently implementing a 4-year forum randomized control to establish what we are doing. And this is we are doing in Keonjhar, and basically to compare with the control villages and different variants of nutrition sensitive agriculture to the control. Thank you so much.
Most of the participants. Before I think I open for questions, sir, with your permission, I would like to mention something. I think when we are talking of bridging the gaps, I think one important issue which was discussed partly yesterday and partly by Nitya just now is a wash input, sir. I think wash is a very essential bridging the gap, because when you think of nutrition, sir, I would agree that on one side agriculture is there, which gives the input of food and nutrition, but on the other side the leakage of the nutrition from the body, you have to retain the nutrients in your body in a proper way, and that's where wash comes in. So I think it's a two-end. On one side of food and nutrition is input through agriculture, and the other side is preventing the loss by giving proper wash inputs. This, I think, sir, is very important. As we know, I'll just very briefly mention, being a very wash person nowadays, wash basically can affect on nutrition in 4 ways, 4 very clear ways. One is, of course, if you are, it's lack of hygiene will lead to all kinds of waterborne diseases, diarrhea, dysentery, and whatever, which leads to a loss of nutrients, absorption becomes less, assimilation becomes, metabolism becomes affected. So on one side it is infection leading to losses of nutrients, Even if you take the nutrient, you are going to lose it. The second one possibly, sir, is again worm infestation. If you don't have sanitation, you have helminthine infestation, worm infestation. As we all know, sir, it precipitates anemia. May not be the causative factor, but precipitates into anemia. So sanitation is again a very important thing. Third thing, sir, is in a way is now that we have water quality, chemical problem like arsenic, fluoride, which is a huge problem. Bangladesh, West Bengal, all over. Arsenic is entering the food chain also. And that even if you have food, it may not be safe for you to eat. So how do you clean up? So a lot of work is going on. So chemical quality of water is again a very important thing. And last, which Nitya mentioned, so water is a cause of drudgery. And we have found, we did this study years back in Nepal, sir. Nepal has the highest, loftiest peaks, and so it's the mountainous regions, hilly regions, and Tarai regions. We did the entire study with the gravity force water in the mountains and plain water systems in the Tarai. And we found we covered more than 24 villages, so both longitudinal as well as cross-sectional studies before and after. Long 3-year study with the Kane-Potaka of Department of Nepal, supported by UNICEF. We started in Sudan also, but after the cross-sectional study, we had to move out because of the war broke out. We found in Sudan, sir, more than 50 to 60% of body energy, food energy, what been spent by women to collect water from the kharifs. They walked 8 hours in hot, sandy deserts. So whatever they were eating, about 1600 calories, 800 was being lost. We used oxylogs to measure, was going in collecting water. So here you have to save drudgery, save energy, the valuable energy, which Nitya mentioned for farming. Very essential to reduce drudgery. To reduce drudgery, to save time and energy, it was called Time and Energy Study. It was by the UNICEF New York, they had commissioned the study to us. So we found that it's a huge loss of energy. So I think these are the 4 ways which WASH very clearly impacts on the nutritional status. So sir, if you agree, sir, in the bridging the gap, maybe WASH could be a very important sector to keep the nutrient, retain the nutrient, within the body of the individual, especially women, which Nitya mentioned. So if you agree, sir, we would possibly like to add another angle to it, saying WASH is also bridging the gap. I would now, sorry to have taken your time. I'm not summarizing the talks because I think everybody knows. It's open for maybe how long? About 10 to 15 minutes question. Anybody wants to have any question, please?
I'd like to thank Nitya and Joanna for bringing us down to earth, at least me down to earth. I'm not going to use the word beneficiary that we use in development circles. I think it's insulting. We have to understand the customer or the user. And I just want to share a couple of points for those of you who are interested, and we can talk about it later. The first thing is, if you want to understand your customer, don't wait till your product is ready. Go back to before you even strategize your research. I'll give you an example. IPGRI, which is the previous avatar of biodiversity, took me to Tanzania and Uganda to understand why an excellent pest-resistant plantain was not being picked up by farmers. We figured out after talking to the farmers and the consumers that the only reason they were rejecting is because it tasted awful. Nobody had bothered to explain to the scientists that ultimately people were eating this particular plantain because they loved the taste, the texture, and the way it cooked. So let's go even before the research starts. Point number 1. Point number 2, let's not reinvent the wheel. We know a lot about user experience analysis and design analysis. Let's learn from other sectors. Right. One of the important things is, please don't use subject matter experts to find out things about customers, because they already know what customers are and they'll tell you what they know. If you're interested in finding out about customers, send in strangers who are good at it and let them learn from customers. We don't ask customers what they want because they usually tell you what they think you want to hear. We watch them and observe them after asking them what they want, and that's where we learn. So I know you're surprised by this most probably, but marketing people use ethnographic and anthropological methods way before anthropologists and ethnographers used them. So please consider that. These are methodologies that work. You know, the last 15 years, I've been helping a private sector company to take innovative products and services to market to benefit the rural poor through markets, not by giveaways. I've learned more about understanding customers and marketing than the previous 30 years of development work. Please take what these two people said very, very seriously. Thank you very much.
मैडम, मेरे को इंग्लिश नहीं आते, हिंदी में बात कर सकता हूँ? जो मिलेट फूड्स है, रेडी टू ईट रोटी के टाइप में देना है। एक आदमी को 10 रुपये के अंदर पेट भरने का सिस्टम तैयार करना। जो भी जवार, गेहूँ, बाजरा, रागी, ये सब रेडी टू ईट रोटी बना के देना पड़ेगा। 10 रुपये में एक आदमी को पेट भरने का सिस्टम मैं बना दिया हूँ। आप इसको चाहे तो देख सकते हैं, मेरा स्टॉल पे है। 100% न्यूट्रिशन का रेडी टू ईट रोटी है मेरा। और जैसा चावल, गेहूँ सब्सिडी में देती है गवर्नमेंट, वैसा हमारा जो भी जवार, बाजरा, रागी, ये भी सब्सिडी में गवर्नमेंट को देने के लिए आप सूचना करेंगे। नमस्ते।
Thank you so much. Dr. Ramanarayan, you mentioned about the distinction between extension approach and development approach. And I think one important challenge of development approach, which Professor Swaminathan also has highlighted, is the spiritual dimension. So it is in this context, the hope that you mentioned, that how do we cultivate hope work and hope meditation as an aspect of a new spiritual ecology of hope. It is in this context, with due reference to Paulo Freire, this methodology of critical reflection also need to be accompanied by a new methodology of meditation. So that is the crying need. How do we bring a meditative approach to developmental dynamics, which would help bridge the bridge the gap. My query to Professor Nithya Rao is that this question of time and time inequality, how do we address the problem of time inequality in the context of gender inequality by rethinking the idea of time, not just as individual but social time? It is in this context, in the context where women are, we have to think about creation of new social time. For example, a different culture of time sharing between men and women. And therefore, the idea of time must be freed from just a quantitative notion of time to a different kind of qualitative notion of time. And my final query to Dr. Joanna is, this language of smart food is very interesting, but it can be brought together with the idea of slow food. But the language of smartness has a danger of just being within a technological determinism. Can we think of a new language or a related language of smart and soul food, which would bring technology and the question of a new kind of poetic imagination to think about food, which is simultaneously physical and spiritual?
Your question of bringing in the spiritual dimension into the development work, I think the very approach itself integrates a spiritual kind of transformation. I would like to just illustrate 2 examples. When one of the examples I showed of critical reflection was how it helped us to reflect on what our new learning was. Because when we were doing the participatory exercise with the participants, then we learned that we were only thinking oriented from the textbook way, that affordability, availability is what determines people's food habits. But their daily life, the structuring of their daily life itself, is something that we needed to look into. When that new learning came to us, we had to accept it in all humility. And so don't you think humility is a part of spirituality? You know, we may use other terms. The humbleness that is needed development, they learn, has to come along of the intervention. And that is an important spiritual aspect of the program, I think. As far as the people are concerned, what is important in these programs, what we found was, we need to facilitate them to help them gain control over their own life. Now, I have no quarrel with all the technologies which are being taken, but do people have a choice really, or are they being brainwashed to toe the line of whoever the person is who's taking the technology, you see? Now, you are not the single player in the field. The government is doing giving some inputs, some other NGOs giving some inputs. You are also going with your own technology. It is very important to raise the critical reflection, to analyze all these and decide what is important. Again, I would like to give one example here. When we were asking people, okay, you have set your goals, now this is what you are going to grow. Now the role of the technology comes in to facilitate how to enhance your production or so on. Now, what is it that you would like to do? Like, do you want to adopt totally organic methods of cultivation? Do you want to have the mixed, some chemical inputs with soil health as a criterion? They thought for a long time and they said, we would prefer something that is within our own environment, under our control. Because government policies changes, the vagaries of the government policies are so huge. Because suddenly the fertilizer subsidy is taken, suddenly subsidy is coming in. We don't want to be dependent on anybody. We would like to be the controllers of our own destiny. And that is liberation, and liberation is mukti, isn't it? So I think the spiritual aspect is built into the development aspect.
Thank you for your question on time and time inequality, and not looking at it only as a quantitative idea, but also a social time and the qualitative notion of time. And I think that's right, because a lot of the care work in particular, it's not only, the argument is often that women like to do it, they are close to their children. A lot of it is the emotive or emotional content of care. So all of care, of course, can't be measured in quantitative terms. You can't also value it in monetary terms, because you may, certain activities, I think this has been a long-standing debate within the feminist world, that, can you value domestic work? Okay, certain things can be outsourced and so on, but there's something additional to that, particularly in care work, which includes love, affection, personal bonding, relationships, and so on. So there is a qualitative notion, of course, embedded. I think one of the things why this kind of thing is important, as you yourself pointed out, is because of the gender inequality embedded. Because I think for human beings, then the quality of care and relationship should equally apply to everybody. Not that women are tasked with that particular task. And I think because of that gender equality, it has become important to actually highlight that this is what is going on, so that we can make a better life for everybody. And actually, this has been recognized by the UN in the Sustainable Development Goal 5. 5.4 is actually on unpaid care, and it includes 3 things, what they call as the 3 R's. One is reduce, so reduce for everybody. Second is recognize, so recognize its value. So this could be the social value of work, of time. And third is redistribute. And redistribute, again, could be amongst different members of society. So it's not only between men and women within a household, but it could be community institutions play a role, it could be state plays a role, it could be markets or other organizations that play a part in terms of sharing and redistributing the burden of work. So I think we are moving in that direction, but some amount of highlighting quantitatively because of the gender equality is still important. Thank you.
Okay, so the 2 comments, first of all, the gentleman who has the millet rotis. Okay, let's meet after. I want to see your millet rotis and taste them. And this second question in regards to slow food versus smart food, or how we define slow food. All that's still open, so I'll take your points on board, and I'm well aware of slow food, which is a fantastic movement. Where that will be relevant is, I didn't have time to mention, one of the initiatives we have is we want to set up an accreditation scheme for smart food. Because what you get currently is you'll have accreditation schemes from the nutrition perspective. So for example, in Australia, you get the National Heart Foundation tick for something that's low in cholesterol. Then you get accreditation schemes for something that's relevant to the environment. So for example, fish from sustainably fished sources get a stamp of accreditation for that. And then you get accreditation schemes for farmers, like Fair Trade, which is the most well-known one, where the farmers get a fair deal. But none of those have been brought together, and we hope to do that with smart food, so that we're and as doing that, we will have to look at how we really define and quantify smart food. So we'll have to look at the different aspects that you mentioned.
If I can just add on what Nitya just said, saving of time and energy. Though that was energy saving because of water. But we did find that saving of time, it was a 3-year study, the feeding practices improved for the children. Women took more rest. The maternal mortality had reduced because there are the postural problems which happen when you carry water up the mountains. And most remarkably, there was a definite reduction in the severe number of severely malnourished children, and the number of malnutrition or undernutrition reduced, I can't remember the data exactly, but more than 20%. So there was an overall improvement of the nutritional status of the children, of the under 5 children. So there is definitely saving of time, impacts on the family's nutritional status very significantly. There's no doubt about that. I think one more hand there. Yes, please. Last question, please. Last question.
Thank you. Just want to know whether we have any studies on a time use pattern and female-headed households, and what is the time use pattern in female-headed households particularly, and how it would be affecting the care economy post-harvest, and with the increasing feminization of agriculture that's happening, how that would be impacting all that, whether we have any studies on that, and whether there has been any research in LAMSA project or anything so far.
No, I think short answer is no. There haven't really been any studies on this. We look out for some, maybe we should do some.
Adding on to the whole issue of time burden, see this, what Dr. Nitya mentioned was, it is one manifestation of inequality. That is, being burdened with overwork is one manifestation of women's gender imbalance and inequality. There are other manifestations also, the lack of social participation by women. That is also another manifestation. For example, in this project, when we implemented the inability of women to participate in village meetings, they had to sit at the back, and how the men participants who came into the program facilitated the process. This enabled women to participate in meetings, come forward, speak up, and they also started going and attending panchayat level meetings. No, this was a burden. No, along with all your other work, that was my greatest worry. And when I was interviewing to these women, they said, yes, it does take up our time. Yes, we need to walk and go there. But going to fetch water, but dressing up nicely and going to a meeting and speaking are two different things. Now look at the perception of what is a burden. What we think is a burden may not be thought of as a burden by someone else. That's why the participants' evaluation of what the whole exercise becomes very important.
I think it was a very vibrant session, and especially when we have Professor Swaminathan sitting all through, I think it's an honor for all of us. I think the session, let's close the session, No more questions.
It is quite an enriching presentation by the panel, triggering further discussions on the floor. And on behalf of MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, we extend our sincere thanks to the chairs and the panelists for beautiful articulation on the subject. Thank you so much.